I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. And today we're talking about how to stay excited about your sewing queue. So we're going to cover how to choose your next project, and then a process you can rely on for keeping your queue interesting. All right, let's get into our icebreaker for today, which comes from Jenny D. And Jenny asks, do you sew for your husbands? If so, what make have they loved and what was a fail? And Haley, do you sew a lot for Charlie? I'll let you start with that one.
Well, I have sewn for Eric, and I do sew for him on occasion, not regularly though. The last thing I made for him was a Larkin bomber, and it was also practical because he was modeling for the photo shoot and we didn't have our sample sewer fell through, and so I had to sew it. But I have sewn for him. I've made like button-ups for him and like pullover sweaters and things like that. The thing is that Eric is like does not really care about clothing that much. It's very much like an incredibly practical thing. The simpler, the better. So it's just like not really like time well spent to make clothing for him most of the time. And he doesn't acquire new clothing very often. He's very inspirational in that way. So I don't sew for him often, but I do. But when he does wear the things I've made for him, he brags a lot about them. So he gets major brownie points. And he always wears his Larkin when he needs like to have his picture taken or something for work. So cute.
That is cute.
For Charlie, you know, at this age, they're just growing so fast. Sometimes it feels hard to justify sewing all of her stuff. She wears a ton of hand-me-downs. I'm really grateful that we get that. I sew whenever we have a special occasion. I do sew her dress for that. She was a flower girl recently. I made her a dress. I always do her Halloween costumes. I kind of reserve it for more special things. And because of that, she sees sewing as like this really treasured special thing, and she's really started recently to show a lot of interest in it. But the cutest part is that she doesn't call it sewing with an S, it's zowing. Mama, will you teach me how to sew? Mama, what kind of sewing machine is that? It's so cute. She really wants to learn how to sew, and I hope, I mean, like, you know, whatever she's interested in, I will support. But like, I can't help but keep all my fingers and toes crossed that she will become a little sewist.
A little zoist.
A little zoist.
That's cute.
Yeah.
Aw. I mean, I like making kids stuff, but yeah, it's not the most long-lasting.
Yeah, do you sew for your niece?
I do. I did when she was a baby. I made her a lot of clothes when she was a baby. Her birthday's coming up. I was thinking about making her some stuff, but I ended up not. So she's growing so fast. It's hard. But I think I might. Her mom sews too, so my sister sews. So she's got a lot of clothes. I don't really sew for Ken, to be honest, for some of the same reasons that you mentioned, Haley, but also because I tried to teach him how to sew, and he did. He made a bag, and he made a Negroni shirt with me, with my help. He did a pretty good job. Of course, he pointed out all the flaws, like all of us do, but he didn't really stick with it or continue. So I kind of figure if he wants something handmade, he could pick up the sewing machine and I'll show him how to do it. But I haven't really made him stuff. I have knitted him some sweaters, and I did have one that was kind of a fail. So Jenny asked about fails. It just came out way too big. And that's the thing with sweaters, is fitting can be really tricky. And I don't think I had as much experience with it back then when I made it for him. So it came out really large, and I don't think he still has it. It was really oversized.
I remember helping Ken with a sewing project at one point. I think he was cutting out like a Negroni or something. And he, instead of cutting the interfacing on the fold, he cut two like mirrored pieces. And he was like, what do I do? And I was like, you can still use it. And he's like, oh, cool. He just happened to be in the sewing room at the same time as me.
I wish he had stuck with it, but it wasn't for him, and that's fine.
He probably knows so much more about sewing than the average person.
Yeah, he knows a lot about it, I'm sure. He knows the lingo, that's for sure. Well, thanks for the great question, Jenny. I love that one. And if you have an icebreaker for us and you want to leave it for a future episode, if you're a Seamwork member, you can go to seamwork.com/go/icebreakers and you can leave it there. There's a thread on the community where we collect them and we'll probably use it in a future episode. So let's get into our topic for today. So let's say that you planned out your sewing, you set up a sewing queue, you have the best of intentions, but then sometimes you can still get stuck even after all of that planning work. So today we're going to share some tips for continuously balancing your sewing queue so it always feels fresh and it always feels full of momentum and really inspiring for you. So Haley, tell me what's next in your sewing queue.
Oh, why do you have to ask me such hard questions? I can tell you what I just cut out.
That's not a hard question. It shouldn't be.
I'm going to have a baby like in a matter of weeks. So I honestly haven't thought much past the projects I have cut out right now. I just cut out a bestie bag from Blackbird Fabrics. It's like a crescent bag. And I cut it out in like a scrap of the heavyweight denim we used for the Parker jacket with like a gingham lining. It's going to be so cute. And then I also cut out, some top secret upcoming seamwork patterns. I do kind of have a little bit of a plan. I'm cutting a few easy, like low mental overhead sewing projects. So when I'm on maternity leave, if I need to escape to my sewing room and do something that makes me feel like a whole human and not a milk factory, I can go sew like a couple simple seams and like just things I don't have to think really hard about. So those are the projects I have on my sewing queue right now. But I'm also setting those aside with like low expectations of myself just because of my life season. And as everyone knows by now, I don't like cutting. So I was like, if I get that out of the way, I'm removing a major obstacle for myself. Super smart.
Yeah, it is very smart. Yeah.
What about you? What's next in your sewing queue?
I have a few projects on deck right now. The one I was going to sew, I'm still waiting on fabric. My fabric order was canceled unbeknownst to me. So I had been waiting for it and I guess they were out of stock and didn't tell me. So I'm going to be sewing, I think probably next, the Sloan dress in a Japanese cotton with this really pretty flower print on it. So I'm really, really excited about that. That's going to be a fun one.
I love that pattern. That'll be great.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be really nice for spring and for summer, I think. Well, I have a lot of stuff in my sewing queue right now, and it can just be hard to kind of figure out what to sew next, especially when you have one of those fabric orders canceled.
Yeah, what do you, speaking of like challenges, like what is the biggest challenge that you face with your sewing queue?
I think for me, the biggest challenge is not getting distracted by a million other ideas because there's just so many, and not just clothing, but I want to make stuff for the house. I want to make presents for people. There's a lot of stuff. We talked about sewing for kids, and I was thinking about sewing for my niece's birthday, didn't end up doing it, but there's a lot of other ways that I could be using my sewing time. So it can be hard to kind of stick with the plan once I've made the plan.
I agree. That's probably my struggle too, is that all these new shiny things come along and grab my attention. It's particularly challenging when you work at a place that releases sewing patterns every month. And I like the things I design. So I'm like, ooh, no, maybe I want to sew this instead. But then I have to wait for it to be fit approved and then graded and all of the things. And I know our pattern makers can get annoyed with me. I'm like, is it graded yet? Is it graded?
It is hard. There's just so many great choices. And I mean, that's true no matter what. There's just a lot of options out there. So it can be hard to, once you've made the decision, to stick with the decision.
Yeah, definitely. How often do you find that you stray from your sewing queue?
Lately, not that often.
Good for you.
Well, I think it's because I really do try and put a lot of intention into what I'm going to make and really think about it a lot. And I think the more time time you spend in that design process, the more committed you feel to it. So that really helps me. And I also have gotten into the habit of going through the Design Your Wardrobe process 4 times a year, like we do as a group now, 4 times a year. And I find that really helpful because if there's something new that catches my eye or I have a new idea, it's not that big of a stretch to just wait until the next season to sew it. And usually, the weather's not going to be so incredibly different that I can't incorporate that idea or at least revisit it and see if it's still something that I'm interested in a month or two versus just, doing it right now. But sometimes you do want to have that spontaneity and just make the thing that you're really, really excited to make. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. So it's a balance.
I think that I struggle between that because I think that the spontaneity can lend a lot of momentum to your sewing. So I try not to eradicate it from my process while still keeping my eyes on my big picture sewing goals. And finding that balance is really, really hard. And I feel like where I tend to stray as well. All right. So I think we can get into the tips here. So what we're presenting today is kind of a process that can help you to stay more motivated when it comes to your sewing queue. A little bit of it is kind of like maybe more of an agile approach to how to manage your sewing queue, which I really appreciate. And the first kind of step that I like to use, especially when I'm feeling maybe a little bit stuck, is I start with something that really motivates me. And this is going to be really personal to you and what feels exciting for you in that moment. So some examples of things that might be very motivating to you could be starting with something that's really low effort and high reward. You can also start with something that I think Sari has coined an outfit rock star, something that you're going to wear with a lot of different types of outfits that'll become a real workhorse for you. I think these are both really good examples of things that are going to be motivating to you because I find the most motivating types of garments to be the ones I'm going to wear all the time because every time I wear it, I'm going to think of sewing and I'm going to want to sew more.
I agree with that. And I think if you can start wearing something right after you make it, it really helps to kind of push you to make the next thing. At least I feel that way. So I think those are good tips, starting with something that really motivates you. And then after that, I think it's helpful to move on to something that can help to continue building that momentum and excitement. So often that's something that you can style your most recent project with. So if you are making one of those outfit rock stars, maybe like it's a skirt and you can sew a top that'll go with it and you'll have a complete outfit sewn. I think that can be super motivating. Or it could be something that will fill a really big wardrobe gap. So let's say you really need, even if it's something simple, like you are out of t-shirts that you really like, making something simple like that can be another way to kind of continue building up that momentum. But I really like the idea of kind of starting with an outfit, starting with the project that's going to motivate you the most first, and then moving on to something that goes with it and having a complete outfit that you can work with. I think that's a really fun way to go about it.
I agree. It makes me think of when you would go back to school in the fall and you'd have your complete outfit that you felt so spiffy in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Your first day of school outfit.
You'd lay it out with such care the night before, creating that experience for yourself as an adult.
That's a fun way to think about it. We don't really get that experience as much as an adult unless you're going to a special event or something like that.
I know. It makes me kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit.
I know. Maybe the first day of work at a new job or something like that.
Yeah.
Not anymore, though. So many people are working from home, so.
You don't even have to put shoes on.
No.
I can't show off my new Keds. So sad. Well, building off of Sari's tip for something that builds momentum is something that I like to think of is keeping that momentum going by bringing balance to my sewing queue. So some of the ways that I like to do this is making sure that I'm alternating between high intensity and low intensity sewing projects. So, basically what I'm saying is quick and easy or something that's a little bit more skill and labor intensive. I think that Quick and easy is really great, but I find that if we get into a rut of quick and easy, that it can really begin having the opposite effect. And then on the opposite end of that, if you're sewing things that are just maybe a little bit overly too many complicated things, it can feel like a real barrier to getting started. So making sure that you're finding balance, and maybe your balance is different than my balance, but finding what your balance is and trying to stick to that. Another way to keep your momentum going is to work with a good mix of familiar and new skills. Something that I like to suggest to people, especially when sewing is a little bit newer to them, when they're in the beginner or like advanced beginner phase of their sewing journey. And you can carry this across the board in your sewing journey, is making sure that you're incorporating 1 to 2 new skills with each new sewing project that you pick out. Can be a really good way to make sure you're like accessing that part of your brain where you get into a good flow state. It doesn't become so boring that your brain can go off to La La Land and, play cartoons in the background.
Is that what happens in your brain?
I don't know. Not really. I usually am making like a grocery list, if I'm being totally honest.
Thinking about what to have for dinner.
Exactly. You need to have something that's stimulating enough, though, that's going to keep you in the moment of what you're doing. And making sure you're balancing the familiar skills with the new ones is a great way to do that. And then my last tip in keeping that momentum going here is to throw in some like wild card non-garment projects. I find that sewing accessories in home goods is a really great way to kind of keep my momentum going when I'm on a good sewing roll.
I think that's a really good one. That's something I try to do as well. Like make some curtains, make some pillows, make some new napkins, something like that I can get a lot of use out of and that I see every day and keeps my spirits up when it comes to sewing. All right. So if you're ever stuck in the midst of your queue and you just kind of feel like you don't have that momentum going, here are a few kind of gimmies for you. So these are some ways that you can just think about, okay, what can I sew right now that's going to get me going again? And the first one is just what color thread is in my serger right now. I think this came from somebody on our community who said that they use this to decide what to sew next.
And you know what? Ever since they've brought it up, I actually have done this on a couple occasions.
Sometimes it's the best way.
It also motivates me to finish something that's almost done, as I'm like, if I rethread my serger, then I'm going to have to like rethread it again next week in this blue color just to finish a couple seams. So I might as well finish it.
Yeah, that's a good point. But it can be a way, like if that is a barrier, and I know for me, changing out the thread in my serger can be a barrier.
It's not hard. It's just annoying.
Yeah, it's just an extra 5 minutes that I don't want to spend. So yeah, why not? Why not make it easy for yourself if you can make it easy for yourself? Another similar one is just what project do you have all the supplies for? And if you've got them all there, maybe it's something that you can just start on right away. Or you can make something that you've sewn before, so it just feels really approachable because you've done this before. I love to do that. I like to make the same thing over and over again, especially if it's a project that I love and I know I'm going to love the next version of it, then why not make it again? And that can be just an easy entree back into sewing if you're feeling a little bit unmotivated or a little bit stuck. So those are just a few ways you can do that.
Yeah, I like all of these that you kind of like remove a barrier for yourself. One barrier being the serger, rethreading your serger. Another being having to go to a fabric store or having to like refit something and go through that whole process, starting with something tried and true.
Or just having the uncertainty of not knowing how it's going to come out.
Yeah. So like seeking things with a lower entry point is definitely key.
All right, so those were our tips for today. I'm going to recap them. So the first 3 are really about ordering your projects, ordering your sewing queue. So this is something you can do on the fly, but it's also something you can do once you've made your plan, once you've got the projects that you want to sew over the next couple months, you can just put them in the order that you think is going to motivate you the most. So tip 1 is to start with something that just feels intrinsically motivating. So maybe it's something with a low effort, high reward, or something you know you'll wear a lot. And then after that, moving on to something that helps to build on that and build that momentum and excitement. So maybe it's something that will go with project number 1. And then after that, keeping the momentum balanced by alternating between those high intensity and low intensity sewing projects, and then maybe occasionally sprinkling in some accessories or home goods or something that's easy for you. So those are kind of the ordering tips. And then if you are ever kind of stuck in your queue, think about some easy questions that'll remove barriers, like what color threads in your serger already, what project you have the supplies for, or what have I made before that I would love to make again. So those are some ways for you to get unstuck, and hopefully you found something helpful in there today. What's your takeaway from today's episode, Haley?
I think my takeaway is from the discussion portion of today's episode, talking about what's in my sewing queue. And it was really funny to me that my knee-jerk reaction was, I don't know. But then I was like, wait, I do know. So it really could be my pregnant brain, but also it could just be, it makes me wonder if I have my project plans in a sketchbook. Maybe I should be putting them on my bulletin board or my inspiration board, or putting them somewhere a little more front and center as a nice, healthy reminder of the things that I'd like to do with my creative time.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was going to be a gotcha question.
I saw the questions in advance. I should have known.
You're like, what?
What? How dare you ask me that?
Well, let me think. What is my big takeaway from today? I think for me, it's really thinking about that alternating between the high intensity and the low intensity that I came away with today, because that's something I try to do, but I hadn't really thought about intentionally ordering my queue of projects in that way. After I've made them, I just kind of, for me, once I make my sewing plan, I go through the whole design your wardrobe process, and then I have a queue of, maybe 3 to 6 projects that I want to sew. And I don't really think too much about the order I'm going to make them in. It's just sort of like, well, I'll go order fabric, and whatever fabric comes in first, I'll start with that one. And I think ordering them so that there is that alternating between easy, hard, intrinsically motivating, a little more challenging, and, really doing that intentionally from the beginning could be really fun. So I might try that next time.
Oh, I'm excited to see how your next sewing queue turns out.
Me too.
Maybe it'll make it even more successful.
I'm going to be planning my next season pretty soon, so I'm excited about it. All right. Well, if you are interested in designing your own wardrobe, in addition to Design Your Wardrobe, which is our program that we do 4 times a year, we also have a free sewing planner, which is actually a part of Design Your Wardrobe, but you can get it for free. And it's a free printable tool that helps you design and plan your sewing projects. So it includes pages for sketching looks, for planning out your individual projects with all your sketches and all your swatches. And then you can just print out as many pages as you need when you need them. So it's available for free at seamwork.com/go/planner. So that's seamwork.com/go/planner. And you can download that for free. And it'll kind of walk you through. You'll also get an email series that goes with it that kind of walks you through the whole process. It's sort of like Design Your Wardrobe Lite. And if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a review. We love reading your reviews. We read every single review, and we love to see them. So we super appreciate it, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other podcast platform. If you could leave us a 5-star rating and a review, other people will see it and it'll help them discover the show. And that really, really helps us. So thank you so much for doing that. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. That's where I post a lot of my projects and project diaries. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and be part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that does it for us this week. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.